Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak on Citizen Television. Nominated Senator Gloria Orwoba with us in studio. Public policy analyst Anil Maliba and Kidimwaga. Anthony Sambabuluma is the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya Young Parliamentarians Association. Ladies and gentlemen, back to the street says the opposition. Raila Odinga warns that anti-government demonstrations could resume as early as next week after the end of the holy month of Ramadan, and says this is part of seeking to pile pressure on the government through the protests to run concurrently with the bipartisan parliamentary talks following the picking of the representatives in both teams that will be representing both sides of the political divide. Arnold, it's all again a deja vu, back to the streets. But what will then parallel talks and bipartisan process mean in this case, in the case of stability and the talks that were called for?
Allow me to just quickly build on what Senator Gloria said. She actually feels like Saitabao Kanchori has not, of course, he's misbehaved. She's talking from a corporate world, which is okay. But I actually hold it that Saitabao Kanchori is actually a hero of our democracy. We should actually, he might be bad-mannered, of course, cantankerous even, but he's actually a hero of our democracy and a patriot. Because you see, what we've seen coming from the Azimio side is that this is a delayed pain. You know, like we have got a scuffle in the studio here, we fight and none of us cries, but when I get home, I start crying. As in, Azimio really wanted to weep, or at least release. Somehow they've actually gone round and round and round. So as we try to push this idea that somehow there was blatant theft, somebody is actually pointing us to another direction. We need this balance, we need this truth. So there's also this, you know, there are people who believe in Raila Odinga 100%. Mm-hmm. Those people, whatever is actually said, believe it to be the gospel truth. So even if, for example, the people currently around Baba have organized and have set up a facade of a narrative, those people believe that to the very end. So I do not think that what Kanchori is doing should actually be looked down upon or thought of to be this is how you strengthen democracy. So before you come out and tell us that you have stolen, and you know, it builds into what the point I raised and what Kidimwaga has actually just said, that in the Maina Kiai case, they say that the final result is a Form 34A. So what is in the server, is there anything in the server that can impeach Form 34A? So long as Form 34As cannot be impeached, any other thing is noise. And they know that. So we'd rather, like, for example, do these guys even have their own set of Form 34As? They even chose some select polling stations where recounting was done, and there was no variance. So the highest way of actually endorsing an election and decision-making is the people voting. We then had issues. We went to the Supreme Court, the highest court we have. That court actually sided with the people and said that this particular decision. So, when you're talking about what they're talking about, these issues, there are a few issues we must actually say, and say them very, very strongly. That one of the reasons why the demonstrations picked up very fast were 4 reasons. The 4 reasons why the demonstrations a little bit look like they got a little bit of traction. Number 1 is the cost of living, and that the government has been under-communicating. The government communication infrastructure is, in a word, has actually been dead. So, like for example, on June 27th, 28th, and 29th, 2022, Raila Odinga and Martha Karua did a series of press conferences telling off the people who are calling for the cost of living. Then the prices of food were higher than they are today. So government, for example, should actually have gone out and actually just compared the numbers then. When Raila Odinga was calling the people who were complaining about the cost of living and saying that wanabweka. You know, Raila talks about rigging, but he has also rigged this country. The system in this country is actually rigged by him. He talks about him being rigged out of election. But you see, like, for example, the truth is only the truth when he declares that it's the truth. When the cost of living was up there, flour was about 250, 230, and cooking oil was about 500. He told the people walikuwa wanabweka. Now, cooking oil is actually about 250, the same quantity. The flour is between 170 and 200, depending on where you get yours. He now says the cost of living is high. You know, that is how you rig a system. So, Going back to the streets, there are a few things I think that we must actually do this. That number one, the media space is also very hostile towards government. That is one truth that we cannot run away from. You will just look at the commentaries and everything, even the commentariat.
As it should be.
Okay. I'm talking about hostility. You see, oversight is not the same as hostility.
Okay, but what then do you mean? Because there are very specific issues that you have raised, and on the high cost of living, of course, I'll be giving you some statistics and numbers.
Can I just execute
Yes, you will finish. You will finish, and allow me also to hold you to account as you proceed. Yes, proceed.
So I was saying that one of the reasons why the demonstrations looked like they were legit was because, honestly, the cost of living is difficult, but the numbers, the absolute numbers, cannot be compared to at the time when the person who's now leading this particular campaign was out there telling us that it was not government's mistake that the cost of living was high. It was about externalities. He even quoted Ukraine and other issues.
Okay.
That was then. And it's on record. On June 27th, 28th, and 29th, right. Martha Karua and Raila Odinga telling people that the cost of living and the numbers were higher. So I was talking about government under-communicating. So government needs to put their communication infrastructure in place. That has not been functional because literally it's not been consistent because the numbers, you could actually talk about what the government is doing. People are planting, for example. The government has been giving out fertilizer. We now are seeing issues around that. The government has been giving out subsidized seeds and even helping out farmers on those. That has not been communicated, even just to give people hope.
Okay.
Because the situation is difficult.
Thank you.
Then the other bit of it is this. Let me finish with this.
Okay, briefly.
That the police also mismanaged the demonstrations. Let's not also, for example, why was it necessary that police officers attack vehicles that were, these are camera guys and everything else? That is mismanagement. You are exacerbating a situation. And by the way, if these guys go back to the street, one of the things that the president must do is actually to organize the National Police Service. Because somehow, I would actually say that the way they mismanaged the first batch of demonstrations, you will say that there was sabotage from within. So he must also ensure that that particular end is actually worked on.
Okay, well noted.
That as it may.
Okay, but to be clear on this, we need an objective media in any democracy for us to thrive.
Yes, and an objective media is not one, for example. Let me say this, and of course at the risk of causing trouble, that there are some of your colleagues who are now probably working for government. You people might have issues, and the people now in government might actually have said some bad things against the media. There are cases, if we are honest, you use the word objective, there are cases where the media has been outrightly hostile towards this particular administration. And of course, it's partly because this particular administration also has not also been very friendly to the media. So they're also human beings. So even as they call them out, it's time also when we talk about being objective, the people working for government communication who have got enemies within the media fraternity should not make the guys in the media the enemies of the state and vice versa.
Okay, which is an old double-edged sort of tragedy. But in a democracy, we need objective media to thrive, to hold those in power, like the senator here, accountable for purposes of service delivery. And to you, Senator, as to the parallel demonstrations that were called for by the opposition and what this portends entirely for the talks that were called for between the president and the former prime minister.
I think we're dealing with a team that keeps shifting the goalposts because even just the issue of going out to the streets, the reason of demonstrating it kept on changing. At one point they were saying we must reinstate Cherera 4. That was one reason. Then they came back to the IBC constitution. Then it was the cost of living. And then it was, it's just been shifting. Finally, when both leaders, our president actually came out and said, you know what, I talk to anyone and everyone. And so I'm willing to talk to you guys. So, let's have a conversation. And it was agreed upon. It is not Kenya Kwanza that said we are going to form a committee. It is actually the ODM group that actually proposed that they would like to have a committee so that the dialogue can be structured within that committee. And it was agreed upon by both parties that that committee was going to be a parliamentary committee because the issues that they were raising can only be changed in parliament. If it's about the constitution, the selection panel of IEBC, that can only be changed in parliament through legislation. So then both parties agreed to have this committee within parliament. So they were told, you can front your members within parliament who are going to sit in the committee, which they did. We saw that the list of the parliamentarians was actually from the National Assembly and the Senate was actually fronted by ODM. And at that moment, it is important, by the way, for you to note that at the moment when ODM gave their list, yesterday, I heard them saying, now we have added so-and-so as secretary, so-and-so as who. We want people from the civil society. When they gave their list based on the agreement that both parties had, because it was supposed to be within parliament as both parties had agreed, you could tell that they were agreeable that it was going to be parliamentarians. So yesterday's press conference with the same parliamentarians actually trying to pull in civil society and make this a sort of BBI structure, some, you know, amorphous situation where we are now going to start campaigns and whatever that is. You know, it's completely dishonest of that team. And I'll tell you something. From our end,
what the civil societies here you are talking about? They named Paul Mwangi.
You see, there is a push.
Jeremiah Kioni.
There's a yes.
Okay.
We talk about business community and civil society. Okay. There is a push, and that's why I'm saying that ODM is completely. They're being dishonest. If indeed they wanted those people to be part of the bipartisan talks, then they would have even named them, or they would have pushed for that and agreed to that within the first, you know, conversation where we were saying we are structuring a committee in parliament. And then we could have seen those names, you know. So even from their end, they keep saying, oh, you know, Kenya Kwanza is not honest. From their end, they are not honest. We gave a parliamentary committee.
Okay.
The next thing that now they started saying, oh, we were expecting, you people are not taking us seriously. You know, for me, it's like, anyone who has made it to parliament through an elective process, and you know, even me, I'm a special elect, by the way, because nominated is within that elective process to meet the two-third gender. You can't come back and say, you know, Gloria is less serious than so-and-so. And then now there's even a demand that in order for us to move forward, they want to remove Canaan from our committee. At what point then do you actually... when you envision everything that's happening, they are not interested in the actual talks, because I can tell you, they should have allowed for the talks to happen. We've not even had the first meeting of the bipartisan committee. They should have had the first meeting. They should have, you know, you give a process a chance.
Thank you.
And then at one point you say, by the way, we actually did not want to say this in the beginning, that these people are not serious.
Okay.
But judging by the meetings that we have had, we can tell you for a fact that Gloria Roba, for instance, cannot conduct conversation.
Okay, Anthony, is the opposition jumping the gun here before when the talks begin? And what do you think of Odinga calling for all-inclusive talks in this regard, in the context of what he says, involvement of other parties as well?
I don't actually know where the problem is, because my understanding of a parliamentary process, there would be a component of public participation. That is an avenue civil society and other entities can be able to inject their ideas. So I honestly feel like the best approach must be born out of honesty. And I feel like there is no honesty in terms of this conversation, because, I mean, the demonstrations were supposed to actually get the attention of government to the issues being raised by the opposition. They have yielded, because the president on national TV went and actually acknowledged that there are some legitimate issues raised by the opposition that require a conversation. But he said it's not in his purview to exclusively address those issues. So he threw it to the house of debate, the house of politics, which is parliament. Because again, like I said, Ayub, we must get to a point where we accept to move on from an electioneering cycle, so that we allow ourselves to also give development room. So the only way to balance that is to allow the executive to discharge the mandate given to them by Kenyans, which is execute policies that actually address our problems. Then allow Parliament to do what they are good at, which is the house of debate, the house of politics, balancing the political narratives. So I believe strongly that the president's direction was appropriate, because it gave room for politicians to do what they are capable of. So for us to actually achieve objectivity, they should first of all, as a way of showing goodwill, give an opportunity. We have not even seen these two committees created by Azimio and Kenya Kwanza hold their first joint meeting. So that based on that interaction, then now we begin to ask ourselves who else is missing in this conversation, and how do we accommodate whoever else is missing.
But the challenge is that the public seems to be caught up between the hard surface and the rock because of the grandstanding on both ends of the divide. When you listen to the members and also other members as well of the representatives of both sides of the political divide.
Yeah, but you see,
and the mixed signals that continue to come out of that particular process, which hasn't even kick-started.
So that's when the question that begs is, are they doing it for themselves or are they doing it for the common good? Because if you're doing it for the common good, you start the process. I think we must not forget the reason as to why this process was initiated. One was to cool down on the hostility between the two factions. And then building on that, now build goodwill in terms of political conversations to allow us to look for common places. It's okay for Kenya Kwanza to actually pronounce itself and say that our bare minimum is this. And it's also okay for Azimio to do the same. But at the end of the day, what we expect is that after the two teams have been created, now let's sit on a round table. Then say, these are your bare minimum, these are our bare minimum. What's the common ground? But you see, if you start shouting even before you get to that table, are we even discussing a table? We no longer have it. So that's why the conversation should now shift from, okay, now we have this team A, we have team B. So let's have a sit down. Then during the sit down, now bring the legitimate issues you are raising via media. And say, for example, from our reflections, I think there's an important missing component, which is the public. How do we accommodate them? A parliamentary process is likely to translate into some kind of legislation. A legislative intervention has to, by constitution, have a component on public participation.
Thank you.
So there is no way.
Okay, Senator,
I just want to correct him because he said it 3 times. You can't, public participation, legislation is only done in parliament.
Yes.
So by the time you get to public participation, it is the legislators, the parliamentarians who actually agree. So you cannot have, for instance, in parliament, our committees, the ICT committee, the whatever committees, they don't constitute the public. What happens is that there is legislation that comes from those committees that is subjected to public participation, at which point now your civil society and the public engages. So when we are having a parliamentary committee, which is purely there for purposes of legislating. Because the matter of IEBC, you cannot then say that you have a parliamentary committee, but now we are also saying, bring this religious leader to come here and legislate.
Okay, but he did mention an avenue. An avenue must be there for present, for the public to get engaged.
Saying what I'm saying.
Yes.
The only thing that I'm saying is a parliamentary process will ultimately translate.
So do you agree? Yesterday they had a presser and they said that this committees, which are parliamentary committees. I heard the Azimio guys saying, now we have put a secretary who so and so, we have put people who are actually not legislators. And my issue with that is that they are not being honest because parliamentary committees constitute of parliamentarians.
And they are not members of the civil society, as you have earlier on mentioned. Kidi, because I'm looking at this from the perspective of the fishermen from the coast and the lakeside watching this broadcast, the farmers in Trans Nzoia and the largest central part of Kenya, and also the pastoralist community from the arid and semi-arid lands. Odinga, when he was a presidential candidate, dismissed calls for a reduction of the high cost of living. He said, stop backing, and he is on record for saying that. And suddenly it's important, and one of the big agendas for this talk, which he said must be addressed, which is the high cost of living. And this generally seems to be the trend amongst politicians with regards to when the shoe is on the other foot. I mean, how can we address this dichotomy, which clearly seems to be the trump card of Kenya's politicians?
First and most importantly is that we must get to a point of recognizing elections as the legitimate tools through which transfer of power happens, especially if we purport to live in a democracy. Because if we then want to undermine elections as tools through which power is transferred, then we better set up another system of government. But then, quickly, if I remind you the words of Winston Churchill, is that democracy is the worst form of government, save for all the others that have been tried. So that democracy, for all its imperfections, is the only tool through which the people can donate their mandate to the government of the day. That is why the people of Kenya, and you know, we have had a beautiful history, that the first time we got into multi-party elections, Matiba challenges the election of President Moi. But then when Matiba attempts to seek redress in courts, the court pronounces itself on the matter 24 months after elections. 24 months is a long time. The person in office as appointed ministers has done so much. In 1997, Mwai Kibaki attempts to challenge the election of President Moi again. The court pronounces itself on the matter 12 months after election. So then the people of Kenya in 2010 say that this is a misnomer. How can we make our democracy better? And therefore, the people of Kenya set up the Supreme Court with only one original jurisdiction, that they should deal with any dispute in relating to the election to the office of the president whenever there is any. So that today, as we speak, and you say rightly that for the people watching us from the shores of Lake Victoria, where I happen to come from, and from the coast region and from the pastoralist community, that what is in it for them? The question of high cost of living is not entirely a responsibility of Kenya Kwanza government. There are external factors and there are also internal factors. So one of the internal factors is the question of debt. Because debt, therefore, as we have gotten to a point where the government is not having enough revenue to help it, to have the headroom, to have money to spend locally. So that means that naturally there is a difficult fiscal space in the country. There is a disruption that has come, one with, of course, the recession that comes with the post-COVID era, and secondly, the disruption of the market by the ongoing war in Ukraine. So that some of these issues are, in my view, are not things that are going to be solved in the streets. But then, as a believer of the Constitution, I believe in Article 37, which says that peaceably and unarmed, people can go to the streets. But then, even as you exercise that political right, my question is, what is the political responsibility? I don't think it is politically responsible in the here and now to exercise that right, especially when it has potential of disrupting the local supply chain. My short answer to your question is, I think that because the two principals, the president and the former prime minister, had indicated that they are willing to talk, let that bipartisan talk not become an echo chamber, but let that team engage with honesty, in good faith, in the interest and benefit of the people. For instance, a question like the reconstitution of the IEBC, it may require conversation between both parties. But then, because we have had a precedent where the conversation has taken place and the agreements of those conversations have ended up being acts of parliament. For instance, in 2016, when we had Kiraitu Orengo team. In 2008, before we had the National Accord and the National Accord, there was the conversation that took place in Serena. And it is what was agreed at Serena that formed the bulk of the National Accord and Reconciliation Act. So let us not be afraid to dialogue. And I don't think that anyone should attempt to demonize this dialogue, except that both parties must go to that table with absolute bona fides, good faith.
Well, when you mention good faith,
the
challenge is that there's a deficiency in trust among members of the public, the Kenyan people in this case, when it comes to Kenyan politicians. You mentioned two critical components. Parliament. Parliament is mentioned in the Constitution as an avenue to address all of Kenya's challenges, including the power that it was bestowed upon, that it's the only entity that can impeach the President of the Republic of Kenya, declare state of war, if that comes before Parliament. And ideally, the challenge is that you have mentioned the war in Ukraine as a disruptor in global food supplies. And there was an agreement brokered by Turkey.
Actually, in the global food system.
And the UN as part of offloading the wheat on the ports of some cities in Ukraine, which were impacted largely by the war that was waged by Russia. That was denied categorically by then Deputy President, who was the UDA presidential candidate, that it never had any impact whatsoever on our economy. And then Raila Odinga, a presidential candidate of the Azimio coalition political parties, no, the cost of living isn't an issue. But I'm looking at what's of concern here. March, April, May in 2022, 1 kg of cabbage was 56.86 Kenya shillings, 20% higher than in 2023. Sukuma wiki, 11.2%, that is the rise. Unprocessed cow milk, 19.5% in 2023. 2 kg of wheat flour, 29.4%. 13 kg of cooking gas is now retailing at 3,100 Kenya shillings, 17% increment from what we had the same time last year in 2022.
Yes.
And you see all this haggling and the foggy nature of the talks even before they start.
Yes.
I mean, when will they redeem themselves? I mean, the entire political establishment, because this is what's of concern to the Kenyan people. They want the talks to yield answers that will address what I've mentioned, for example.
Yes.
They want food to eat.
Yes.
They want proper infrastructure.
Yes.
They want proper education.
Yes.
They want service delivery, and they are not getting it.
Are you being left out too?
Okay, I'll come to you. I'll come to you.
No, you've left out.
Hang on, Senator.
Add the main.
You'll have your time.
Add the main.
You'll have your time. Yes, Kidi, respond to my question.
Senator, I think I will teach you a thing about turn taking.
No.
If I do that.
He's giving
Yes,
us
okay.
statistics
Okay.
that are only biased towards this question because he's not told us maize in September was how much and maize now.
I'll come to that question, Senator.
You know?
I'll come to that question. I'm the one posing the question.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, go
As long
ahead.
as you know we are...
Go ahead, Kidi. Yeah, go ahead, Kidi.
Ayub, I am a believer in institutions because in a democracy, the moment institutions fail, and critical ones like parliament, then it means that it is the beginning of a terrible downward spiral. For instance, the question of living is something that, of course, we can sufficiently address ourselves to in parliament. Part of why we are here is because of the finance bill of 2018, which was passed during handshake.
The coalition political party.
Yes. The finance bill of 2018, that was the first order of business under handshake. One of its effects was that it introduced higher taxes to petroleum products. When you look at consumer price index, one of the things in that basket called consumer price index is the cost of transport. Cost of transport will naturally go higher when there is a higher cost of petroleum products. And that will affect the cost of consumable goods. So that these two people, these two principles, over and above them engaging, we must, at all times as a country, give our institutions, particularly parliament and all other institutions, a chance to operate. Because the moment we choose to repudiate the work of the institutions, then we are going to move to a very dangerous trajectory called the rule of strong men. And when we are in the rule of strong men, we shall be depending on whims of individuals. For instance, in election of 2022, it was by grace that we were living in an environment of the rule of law. Because if it were not in an environment of the rule of law, I don't think the president would have been declared. Now, as we move forward, as we build our democracy, we must give our institutions a chance to operate, and one of those institutions is parliament, and people must give parliament a chance to deliver on this bipartisan.
And parliament must be operated by visionary individuals who have the interests of the Kenyan people at heart. Yes, Arnold, I'll come to you, Senator. Proceed.
I just need to say this, that even as we have this discussion, it's also important that we get away, and you've actually tried to actually put it out there, that political communication in this country can actually be very unfair. At least to facts, and it assumes that the rest of us do not have heads. You see, opposition communication, you don't need figures. You don't need facts. You just need to shout that Ayub is bad. And I repeat that. You know, Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's minister for propaganda, said if you tell a lie big enough and you keep repeating it, people will believe. So when these numbers here, I was talking about if proper communication had gone out there, then the people will realize that it's not as bad as is actually being done out here. There are 4 issues currently that Azmi is going out on. Number 1 is the high cost of living. What do you do about the high cost of living? If we are going to demonstrate against the president and the national government, we should also know that agriculture, which is actually at the core of a bit of the cost of living, is devolved, for example. Why are we not, for example, demonstrating and going to governors' offices? Because agriculture is devolved, for example. Why haven't we seen people in Kitale, our food bread, the food basket for this country, people doing that? So there's a little bit of things that are confusing. There's what is happening. But I need to say this. Since the year 2002, Kenya has been on a constant campaigning mode, on a constant electioneering mode. That every time we come in, and there is this thing that the normally is actually sent to us and to keep us busy, this thing called dialogue. We need national dialogue. So for 5 years, we are in a campaigning mode. Okay. I think the person who pushes this national dialogue story has actually known that sometimes a lot of us, the voters, sometimes he thinks that voters could actually be treated like children. When adults are seated having serious conversations over the weekend, there's always a bouncing castle for children. So they will keep on telling us, we are dialoguing. Why I say that this dialogue thing, when it comes to the real thing, the people are actually shoved aside. The first statement by Azimio on the day the president made his concession did not touch on food, the main statement, leave alone when he was responding to the media after that, had very little to do with the cost of living. And that is the issue which the local Mwananchi actually went to the streets for. So, and I can walk you back. We can talk about electoral injustice, for example. The former Prime Minister Raila Odinga was in the handshake, and all of us know what the handshake was. You know, there is what is de jure, and then there is what is de facto. That de jure, he was not in government. But de facto, he actually, like, even his friends who were people he suggested ended up being given positions. But for example, one of those things he has not come out clearly is actually to tell us, when he was in a relationship with the government of the day, what did he do about electoral justice? The same process that brought in the Cherera 4 is the same process that we are trying to use now, the one he's now disputing. He supported that particular process. At what particular point did it become one that he doesn't trust? So, Kenyans must also start thinking about this. That Kenyans go to elections to exercise the sovereign power, to elect a government. And then somehow a group comes up and ensures that that government does not become government. We do not allow government to become government.
Who is this group?
Look at this. Today we are saying that we don't want to talk through parliament. What is the role of parliament? Parliament for us as a people...
Legislate, oversight, represent.
That is the supreme organ. If Kenya was an organization, I'm sorry to use that example, the National Delegates Conference is parliament. Because what is the definition of parliament in governance words is that parliament is the reflection of a people as a government, is the manifestation of the people as a government. So when you see parliament, you are seeing the people. We talk about the essence of representation. That is supreme. You cannot even quantify what representation is. That's why tunawaita wajumbe. They have been sent by us. These guys are merely 6 months into power. And now we do not trust them to do their work. If you look at all the issues that are raised by Azimio, none of it cannot be done by parliament. I need to remind you that in the days of old, we used to have a village square where elders and issues were taken care of. Parliament for us, whether it is the Senate, the National Assembly, or the county assemblies, those are our village squares where our issues can be dealt with. You talk about the cost of living. It will have to affect the budget. It has to be policies and legislation. And our budget is actually a legislative process.
Thank you.
The budget is legislated. You can't get out of that. But I need to say this, probably just as a finish on this particular end. We're talking about a national dialogue. What is the dialogue that Azimio is really calling for? Because these things can be done. If you will want subsidies, you will go to parliament. Whatever you want. So we have elected members of parliament recently, but we want to come up with an extra constitutional process, come up with a document, and then go and tell parliamentarians, we have decided, you people just endorse. As in, what do we take for the people who have voted? Do we really value the vote? Otherwise, when you talk about the spirit of the constitution, why would we be going to votes, electing people? Then you rig that system and start dictating to them what to do. I need to say this, that on the day when we had the president making his concession, Azimio reached out to government. That is a fact, through Junet Mohammed. And they said that they wanted to step back. So, you know, there's that story where I come from, or rather my people who gave birth to me in Nairobi come from somewhere in Kakamega called Momias. We have got a story of a rat that will bite na inapuliza. So on one side, there is a back channel that is open. And on this other side, they are playing up the masses. So can we be honest about this discussion?
What you mentioned as double standards from the opposition. Yes, Senator, earlier you had a point. I did pause you. Now you can proceed.
I think, and allow me to say this, if you're going to give statistics just to show comparison of cost of living, and your point is that everything has gone up from last year to this year, then pose all the facts. Because what you read for us was just supporting evidence to your narrative. But if I tell you that in September last year, unga was between 230, a 2 kg pack, and 250. And right now, today, at the shelf is between 180 and 190.
193 to be specific.
It does, even if it's 195 Ayub, we are not at 200.
And Senator, I mentioned if you have been keenly listening, just to pause you, if you have been keenly listening, itemized number second last 2 kg of wheat flour.
My point is,
I did mention that.
My point is,
if you are keen listener,
so that we are telling Kenyans the truth.
All right.
That is a clear example of whatever strategies this government has put in place within just 6 months, it has translated to something. And you know, that is what, and I agree with Arnold, that is what we are not telling people. The same thing with gas. People are saying cooking gas. What are your stats for cooking gas?
That is 13 kg cooking gas, 3,100 shillings.
So if I tell you Taifa gas at 13 kgs is 1,300.
Where did you buy that? When did you last buy that?
That's what now the narrative is. Where is Taifa gas? So for us as government, where we have failed is, why are we not telling people where this 1,350 gas is? Because it's the same way when you go to the supermarket, you'll get, you'll get milk, right? You'll get all types of milk, including Brookside. So if you keep looking at Brookside prices and coming to studio to tell us Brookside is this much, it's biased, because not everyone takes Brookside. That's not where, when you're doing the statistics and the basis of the data, you're not going to pick the highest end to go and say, by the way, prices are just skyrocketing. So, and the same with banking, by the way. If right now you go to certain banks, their banking services have gone up, because those are banks that actually used to enjoy the monopoly of services from government. And now that they don't have those contracts from government, they have to find a way to stay afloat. So they are pushing their expenses on you. The same thing, by the way, the only thing that we can actually have a conversation here that needs to be done, and that one I honestly 100% agree with, is the cost of electricity. I mean, this other cost, what I'm trying to say is the measures that have been put in place now, including removing the subsidies on consumption and putting them on production. We are going to have our first harvest in June. So until June, you cannot comment on agricultural produce and the cost of those kind of things, because the first harvest, based on the measures that we have put, is going to be in June. But let me tell you what we need to talk about when it comes to, including even in this bipartisan talks, and I'm trying to push for it, is electricity. The cost of electricity and why we have such high electricity. And let me tell you something. We are not talking of it, but recently I was sitting with CEO of Ethiopian electricity, the equivalent of KPLC, yeah? And he said, we are actually making sure and trying not to sign any IPPs, because IPPs just come with expenses, and it's just a way of increasing the cost of electricity. Okay. And then I asked them, I said, how many IPPs do you have? They said, we are trying to sign one, but we are trying to see how we can reduce. In Kenya, we have 27. Today, my electricity bill has shot up 3 times higher. And in fact, I've actually called the people involved. I'm like, what is going on? But the truth of the matter is that we have IPPs who are cartels, and until now that one bring to the table we discuss, because even me who is in government, I strongly, highly believe that these IPPs are actually cartels, agents who are actually, some are being paid to produce nothing and give nothing. Okay, but Senator, you know? Then, so let's have those conversations. Okay, thank you. Admittedly, that is a very point, and you sit in the Senate, and I'm not sure whether you have, or you can relay this information to the Energy Committee Chairperson, the Senator Nyeri County. yes. And I can tell you, by it's good because you don't need to go to... Now, for purposes of the electorate, because we are failing on that, please allow me. Okay. For purposes and because of time... Yeah, and because of time... You raised a very important point, so allow me to pose this question as you respond, and then we proceed. Okay. Because power is very important for production purposes. Okay. You don't need the equivalent of KPLC in Ethiopia. There's a report by John Ngumi, the professor, handed over to President Uhuru Kenyatta before he left power. In it, he said... The secrecy, I quote him, around power purchase agreement, the investor protection focus appears predominant over the consumer interest of the Kenyan people. He pointed a finger of blame at the Petroleum Regulatory Authority for restraining itself from processing Kenya's power tariffs review applications. He further on said, as of June 2018, the company's assets of 54 billion were less than of liability, 106 billion, resulting in negative working capital of 51 billion Kenya shillings. You said you were in government then. What will you do about this? There's a report already. You don't need to hear from the KPLC equivalent of Kenya to Ethiopia because you have a report here. How can you act on this? First of all, if we're going to go on the basis of there's a report, there's also a report on the Ndungu Land Commission. Yes. Yeah. There's a report on the TGRC. There's a report. There's so many reports.
I did not quote those ones.
So,
I did quote this.
Yeah, I'm just saying that cannot be a point of reference because reports that are done can be done in different circumstances.
It was a report on power.
Yeah,
I cited power.
Yeah.
So we are. This is the narrow line.
Allow me to execute.
Okay, Senator, I will give you all the time.
Okay.
Because that is the what the profession demands.
I'm trying to say, when you say we don't need the equivalent of Ethiopian KPLC, I am actually trying to say you're wrong, because one of the things is that they are actually a stakeholder. We actually import power from them, and what we needed to understand. For most people, you know, we talk about kuna kizungu nyingi, and you know now IPP, someone will ask what the hell is that, whatever. The bottom line is this: we have what you call agents in the form of IPPs, and in Kenya we have 27 of them. We have 27 contracts, and what I needed to understand is if this is the norm, why are other countries not having 27 or 5 or whatever? That was the bottom. That is the introduction of the conversation. Only to find out, and that report, by the way, that you're referencing, actually sheds light that those IPPs are cartels. Do you understand? So at the bottom line, what I'm trying to say is, based on that report, which also has been tabled to the Energy Committee in the Senate, and based on the conversations that we've had around the benchmarking of the different organizations, our neighbors, I will tell you for a fact that the cartels that we need to remove out of this equation are the IPPs. Unfortunately, you remember Kenya Kwanza talked about state capture. We were not talking about it in oblivion.
Okay.
We were talking about it in the understanding that it is the different industries in this country that have actually been captured. Electricity is one of them. Of the 27 IPPs, I can tell you straight up, 8 of them belong to an individual. An individual who is very powerful in this country. And some of those IPPs, 3 to 4, actually do not produce any power. They do not, so they're being paid. The agreements that we have signed as a country is that we pay whether we consume or we don't consume. Okay. So there are even plants that are not operational, but because we have those contracts, when we are struggling to meet our operations, when we are struggling to meet our expenses, these things you see we're talking about that we are living beyond our means, part of the people who are being paid for nothing are the IPPs. And for me, I'm saying, whether or not government is supporting me or not supporting me, because at one point, these are things that affect Kenyans directly. I'm telling you that the one thing we need to have a conversation on continuously until we dissolve, and in Parliament and outside of Parliament, until we dissolve and bring to an end those contracts, which are actually, it's just impunity. How do we take away IPPs? Or when are we going to take away IPPs? Even if we actually need to get legal minds, sit them on and tell them, exit us from these contracts, and highlight the owners of those IPPs, because wametufunga as a country.
Senator,
you understand?
It's very straightforward, simple question.
Yes.
And a simple answer.
Yes.
You have a report, courtesy of the taxpayers, money details, the problem.
And we are working on it.
Yes, and we expect solutions from you.
The solution that I'm even telling you now is in the Energy Committee. I'm not in the Energy Committee, but I am working with a team that has insisted not only to pose questions and statements and insist that that report be highlighted. And I honestly, I ask your media house, because without fear, without favor, bring that report you're referencing, have a conversation and give us the names, because you will see even this media house, some of the people who support this media house are the cartels.
Have I not mentioned? Isn't that not fair enough?
Can I say something on the power? It's important.
Anthony has been silent, so allow me to get his comment. Yes, Anthony, please. But in all fairness, what I cited is what the taxpayers had funded for, and the Kenyan people expect me to highlight on this story and the reports which are very important, and hold you people
and give Kenyans the names of the people, the owners of the IPPs. Of those.
But what I cited is the recommendation part of a very important report.
Go like one paragraph above. They are the names of the owners.
But it never cited any names. That is the only challenge with it. It has recommendations and the problems there. Yes, Anton.
I think, Ayub, we have a very great country and great people. I think the only thing we need to train ourselves is the art of honesty. I quite want to advise my good senator that don't fall victim to the tragedy of leadership that is in Africa, whereby you cry the same tears as people who you are leading. You're supposed to actually be proactive and provide a solution. I think you have an avenue that many of us don't have. Some of these issues can be raised on the floor of the Senate.
We have,
and we address the challenge. But having said that, Ayub, I think one of the things that I missed to point out when we were talking about the composition in terms of the bipartisan teams that were created was the fact that I have a problem with the Azimio team. I honestly do have. And my problem is that Azimio, the most proactive face of Azimio on the streets are the young people. But if you look at the composition of the team they constituted, before they even start criticizing what Kenya Kwanza has done, there is no young person on that particular team.
Correct.
It comprises just purely oligarchs who do not necessarily take a front row when they are going, when they are going to the streets. And I think for me that's a problem, because that's abusing the young people, and they need to revise their list unconditionally so that they incorporate the place of young people. I mean, Ayub, if this TV station can trust that we have content that we can share and put out there that Kenyans can listen to at our age, why not give those young people an opportunity to sit in the same table where these issues are being debated? It is the young people who are holding pangas and all those things saying, we want the cost of living to go down. So how will they be able to express themselves if they are not on that table? So I have a problem with that list. That's number one. Number two, Ayub, as a country, we must really understand one thing. In fact, I beg to be forgiven for my ignorance. But I don't know why all of us just focused on the cost of unga. As if when you get unga, you will not need mboga. So I really need to be educated on that space. And I think Maliba, you'll educate me on that. Because I think generally we must agree the cost of living in Kenya has gone high. And electricity, as has been mentioned, is one of those things. And my problem with electricity, again, is not just a question of cost, but even just the management at KPLC is the most inefficient. You meet young people just trying to strive through their hustle. One simple problem to be sorted by KPLC, it can take them a year. But when they are coming for their money, it takes them a day. Look at that. You just need to know Gloria for them to actually solve your problem there and then. But if you don't know somebody within the structure of leadership or in a space of influence, they cannot be able to address. They have even tried at creating a false impression that if you go via Twitter, they would be able to address your problems. I'm saying this as a young person who's also doing business in Kenya. I have a problem with the entire management system in KPLC, beyond even the issue of the cost, because they're abusing their monopoly, they're abusing Kenyans by just consuming our money but not giving us the services we deserve. Okay. And then lastly, I think we must be able to start putting our leaders to account for the salaries and everything that we give in terms of perks. And one way of doing that is by demanding that if you're in a space of influence or a position of power and you can be able to change the lives of Kenya, don't talk like Arnold Maliba, who can only agitate and point out weaknesses. It's about time, and that's why you'd find like we have all these structures being created, the bipartisan structures. Even the politicians themselves do not believe they have capacity to solve the problems that they are on the streets. You imagine a whole parliamentary initiative, somebody holding a press conference and saying, I don't even feel I have capacity to solve this problem we are dealing with, so I need more people to come on board so that we address it. I honestly think if we are honest with this country, what we should be seeing on our TVs today is a genuine concern to the plight of Kenyans. And that genuine concern would only be demonstrated by politicians coming out and saying, okay, our first starting point, and that's what I was trying to point out, Senator Gloria, is can we first of all sit down? And I think that's the spirit of the president. He tried to push them, can we have all you factions? Now, first of all, sit down. Once you've sat down, then discuss what are the pertinent issues affecting the country. Then building on that discussion, now come out with the question of who else is missing and how do we accommodate them. But you cannot say that parliamentarians will abscond from their duty of, addressing the plight of Kenyans. Which they have been. And saying that unless so-and-so is brought to parliament so that we now begin to solve your problems, I think that's not being honest.
Yes, Arnold, you had a point. I'll come to you, KD. Yes, and the best interest of time, because I also need to sample the feedback from the viewers. Okay,
I just needed to respond to the energy issue, but then quickly, when we're talking about the cost of living, of course, he says, I'll begin from that. That is the latest. Of course, we're talking about food, we're talking about shelter, we're talking about transportation, energy, clothing, healthcare, and child care. That then includes education and the challenges people are having paying fees. But in this country, people just talk about unga. Of course, because unga is cheaper. If you run a household, you'll realize that even if somebody told you to buy rice, a kg of rice, if you've got children, looks like it's not something that, but unga can actually hold a little bit. And now, so talking about power, Senator Gloria, the issue of IPPs is one where we use it as an excuse. Kenya is power deficient, is a power deficient country, so we do not have enough electricity. And the truth is that we cannot survive without IPPs. Technically, a fact.
No.
Okay.
Technically,
okay.
including what that report you have actually just cited. I'm actually talking about having looked at the latest one by the Power Association. Kenya Power will tell you that. Everybody in that particular sector will tell you that. So we cannot do without IPPs. And by the way, we started bringing in IPPs when we were having blackouts, the outages like what is happening in South Africa at the moment. So this is where we start. It's so easy to blame IPPs without looking at the technical end. But where do we begin? The facts. Let me just execute this particular point, Mheshimiwa. It's easy to blame IPPs. I would love us to actually open up this so that, by the way, when you sit down, you need to tell people that why did somebody sit down and decide that this is the amount you're paying for tokens and these are other costs? Have you looked at how normal people say that KPLC is a company that collects taxes and then they reward you with a few tokens? Because you look at the amount for tokens is actually normally lesser. Now, why am I saying this? Is that to stabilize the grid, we need IPPs. That is factual. You don't need to argue with it. It's technical. It's out there. Two, sometimes if you look at some companies, including Strathmore University, for example, are doing renewable energy. And you see how they actually are putting it out, you'll realize that how the IPPs collect their money. As in, there is what we've, like the contracts, he was pointing to a fact where they talk about use or pay. And sometimes we've actually put up farms like the wind power, I think in Turkana,
yes,
where we do not have, Ketraco has not put up a line to evacuate the power on that particular end. So on the IPPs issue, we also need to be more than just bashing them.
Okay.
And this is where the biggest problem is. You see, that big amount is that KPLC is just a vendor that then collects those levies. They are not taxes, they are levies. Because for KenGen to get their money, KPLC will collect. For EPRA, which is the regulatory authority to get their money, KPLC will have to collect that. For the IPPs, KenGen, Ketraco, because the infrastructure is largely owned by Ketraco and a little bit in the cities is owned by Kenya Power. So all this issue, we need to talk about one issue that we don't want to talk about.
Which is?
And that is, it's a very populist issue that we, as we are a very populist country, so we don't like dealing with issues the hard way. We'd rather run away with the easy lines like IPPs are expensive and such. This is the issue. KPLC is not operating on commercial principles. There is a huge group of consumers who it costs much more money for KPLC to deliver power to them than the money they are paying.
Thank you.
So when KPLC does that, however much, if you look at your, if you are to take your amounts, the token amounts, you will realize that the money KPLC is collecting now from April has actually gone down. KPLC itself.
Thank you.
But the other levies by the other people, the power, the generators and all the other people has remained constant. Why are we not asking Ketraco, for example, to bring down their levies? Why are we not talking about EPRA to bring down their levies? Why is KenGen and the other people? Why are we not? So all of us are bashing KPLC and KPLC cannot break even. Because
collect from us.
So now here KPLC has got the problem that is the person that the client knows.
Yes.
And who are supposed to be giving us cheap energy.
Yes.
And that is why
we should be negotiating on our
you see, when we talk about cheap energy, the truth is that if we allowed KPLC to operate on commercial principles so that they can actually make, you know, there were a lot of populist policies that were made in the last regime, for example, where we took people like Gloria, who had, they have got money, a little bit of money, and took them in the lower category. I'm saying that, I'm using that as an example, Mheshimiwa, don't worry. So, a little bit of last year, as in the political class decides to make decisions around a commercial issue.
Okay, thank you, Arnold.
And I want to finish with this.
Okay.
Allow me to finish with this on the same.
Okay.
On the same. The same thing applies to taxes. In this country, there's this thing we call the grey economy or the informal sector or the juakali. Those people have serious money, but somehow we are not taxing them enough. A country of 24 million working people cannot have 6 million people paying taxes, and we still pretend around as if it's okay.
Okay.
We need to bring this economy in the same way. We need to tax people.
Okay, hang on. hang on, finish up before you go to Kid and then take the feedback.
We need to stop these populist policies where a few people are carrying the burden of others. There's a lot of joyrider syndrome, especially in the way we do our policies. We need to wake up and be honest.
Yes, Kid.
Thank you, finally. I wanted to address myself the question of honesty, one in the bipartisan talks. But then I wanted to remind my brother Samba that honesty should also begin from the government. You remember that when this administration was elected and sworn into office, there was a general high expectation that the cost of living would come down. Part of where that expectation was coming from was because of what we had been told in the campaign trail, including in the days leading to the swearing in. However, that 7 months after elections, we are still hearing talks that, number one, do not inspire a lot of confidence in the people of this country. One of them is what I would call a headline, that we found empty coffers. I think such conversations, to this extent, number one, continues to undermine the spirit of goodwill in this country, the belief that we have a government in office, a government that is committed to delivering to the people of Kenya. For a long time, the president spoke about the fortune at the base of the pyramid. To this extent, you do not see a much more coherent effort to deliver help to that fortune at the base of the pyramid.
Thank you.
We had the Hustler Fund, which I must say was a good idea, but then after the Hustler Fund, nothing much is happening. We are told that my brother Arnold says that we are in the production. Production takes time. So that today we are in April. The earliest we can get crops from the farm is June. So between now and June, what is happening? The government must remember.
We are demonstrating. We are farming and we are demonstrating.
Thank you. Senator, I'll come to you after we sample.
That we must be deliberate about delivering help to the people at the base of the pyramid. There is a lot of suffering going on around, and the government cannot turn a blind eye to it.
Thank you. Let's now get the feedback from our viewers. Senator, I'll come to you after that because of time, and you'll encompass your thoughts. And here is what you are saying on Twitter. Honorable Lillian Sioi says, in all manner of honesty, the Azimio leader is openly being unfair. There is no way you can have dialogue and demonstrations running concurrently. This shows that our friends from the opposition are not ready to have a genuine conversation. Magwas 3 says Kenya Kwanza government 7 months down the line, but they are politicking if they are going as if they are going to another election. Kenyans trusted them to fix their problems, not hunt the past regime. Gode Barasawere says just like day and night cannot exist in the same space or occur concurrently, Azimio's proposal of having protests and bipartisan talks happen side by side is a show of dishonesty. The opposition should give dialogue a chance. Bobo Tieno Wino says there are Swahili words which says njia mbili ilishinda fisi kupita. Mtaka yote hukosa yote. Tax the Azimio coalition should borrow a leave from both and choose one way, whether dialogue or protests. Engineer Lazaro says if election was really fair and free, fair and transparent, why fear opening the server? Mr. Buluma dialogue meant for reasoning together and to save the nation from collapse. No genuineness in calling for talks with already fixed minds. Remy Butia says leaders should sit down together at the table of brotherhood to create meaningful dialogue. Failure of all sides to fully engage in this dialogue will allow the fires of our past to smolder, ready to flare up whenever new fuel is added. Orenge Waswa says Azimio's proposal of bipartisan talks expansion shows that the more parties involved, the fewer the bottlenecks in the dialogue. Let the Kenya Kwanza administration embrace a broadened approach which will bring out a smooth dialogue. J.M. Musoma says it will be difficult for Raila to sustain the narrative that he was rigged out of the elections in 2022 after his own chief agent exposed him. Nothing much will be achieved via maandamano if they won't culminate to a referendum that can bring his desired reforms like the BBI. Sagioko says food prices are an outcome of an economic fundamentals. A peaceful environment plus enablers is likely to lower the cost over time. Kenya Kwanza administration, government of Kenya is trying, he says. Political instability will have the opposite effect. Let the leaders talk in a civil and structured order. Okello Mwalimu says, as far as I know, both bipartisan protagonists are responsible for our current economic woes. One vehemently defended Jubilee between 2013 and 17 when it went on a reckless borrowing spree, while his brother marshaled his troops to raise the debt ceiling. Let's not be cheated. Thank you for your feedback, yes, Senator. Your final remarks, and as well, you had a point earlier.
Yes, first of all, just to, Arnold says that...
And briefly, because of time.
We cannot survive without IPPs. It's a fact that we need support in terms of generation of power. Okay. Yeah? But you see, what we have done with oil, we have decided to take out the in-betweens, the agents, the cartels. That's why we are doing government-to-government business so that we can bring the cost of fuel down. Now, Ethiopia has the capacity to actually fill the gap of the power that we need in this country. They have the capacity. Ethiopia sells its power, 200 megawatts that it gives to us, at $6.5 US cents. Mm-hmm. I want you to take that price and compare it with how much we are getting the bulk power that we are buying from IPPs within government. And you will see it's like 4 times more, if not more. So before we even go into the levies that are put into the electricity, okay, let's talk about how we are purchasing the electricity. And that's my point, is that we could do it government to government in terms of fuel, then we can do government to government in terms of electricity. Ethiopia has the capacity, our transmission lines have the capacity. By the one question that I asked is, why are we only getting 200 megawatts from Ethiopia? And the guy said, because that's what you asked for. But we are actually capable of giving you more. Okay. And we even have a line that can actually accommodate more. Okay. So there's infrastructure for it. So my point is, that is a simple problem that before we go into the levies can be solved, and it will bring the cost of power down less than half of what we are currently paying. And my final remarks then on that is that, for me, I think, one, we are done with elections. And we in fact, I urge that media houses should stop having conversations around what did you think of the elections, where are we at in the... We are done. We're finished. We went for a competition. There was a winner, and that winner is actually William Samoei Ruto. And I'll say this as the final remark. We had Trump, and we had Trump and we had Biden, right? They ran. They ran for they contested for the seat. Do you think, and do you foresee any time that actually now Biden, because people have gone to the streets like, oh, let us have a handshake with Trump? And by the way, also Trump is saying that the agriculture manifesto theirs was better than ours. So now that I won this seat, I'm actually going to implement Trump's manifesto. Where in the world? So we need to actually call out the nonsense that is going out, because we won. Our manifesto is what the people voted for. And so now we should move on and work on it. And your time is all appreciated. Yes. Concerning, though, of what happened on January 6th when Donald Trump was about to leave power and the insurrection that happened. Well, he has been tried. The beauty of institutions, that's why we have the partition. I don't think we are out of time. 6 minutes past. Thank you, Kidimwaga. Thank you, Anthony Sambabulu. Closing remarks. Thank you. Your time is appreciated. Thank you. 30 seconds. We are absolutely out of time. Kidimwaga and Maliba Arnold, public policy analyst. Thank you. Nominated Senator Gloria Orwoba. The importance of institutions, as South Trump was tried, though he lied 20,000 times in 4 years. Anthony Sambabuluma, Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya Young Parliamentarians Association. Your time is all appreciated. And thank you to you too. Up next is Level Up Gospel Edition with DJ T-Boy. We'll see you next week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday here on the broadcast. Till then, good morning.